Shalom and greetings, friends. Thank you for clicking on part 2, titled End Time Hanukkah Prophecy. And I'm speaking to you on the 8th day of Hanukkah 2012 based on the Gregorian calendar. But according to our Creator's calendar, it is the 2nd day of the 10th month in this year. And the reason it's 8 days, in case you didn't know, Hanukkah is an 8-day festival, is because the Maccabees, when they were in the mountains and during those 3 years trying to restore the Torah and the temple, they swore that once they regained Jerusalem and cleansed the temple, that they would keep Sukkot. It's an 8-day festival we can read about in the Torah. In Leviticus chapter 23, you see all of our Creator's feast days that He shared with His people Israel. And Israel was His firstborn son, as He even says, in regard to the first nation of His people, and to teach all of these commandments and ways of life, of righteousness, to all lead humanity to become like our Creator. And these are all tools. They are all important lessons to learn, even the history of the Maccabees and what they went through. And if you didn't listen to part 1, please go back and listen to it. I ran out of time with our camera, so I'm continuing here with part 2. And in part 1, just as a quick review, maybe you didn't catch all 5 points, and how the Hanukkah story, the Maccabees, and what happened between 167 and 164 BCE, we can see some parallels of the end time. And the first one out of the 5 I'll mention is the abomination of desolation. It's interesting to notice that there's an image. Nebuchadnezzar is one person who set up an image when he actually conquered Jerusalem for the first time. The Babylonians in 586, 587 BCE, and he set up an image, and everyone had to bow and worship to that. And Daniel's 3 friends, their Babylonian names. Most people know their Babylonian names as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but they had Hebrew names, and they were faithful, and our Creator protected them. But that was one type of abomination of desolation that took place. And also with the Maccabees in 167 BC, when they had to start their revolt because Antiochus Epiphanes, and as I pointed out in part 1, is his name in Greek means God manifested. So he claimed also to be God and wanted people to worship him as God. And he set up an abomination, and even wanted to sacrifice unclean animals like pigs in the holy temple. And also in a third time in 70 AD, we see the temple being destroyed by the Romans. And the Romans, they stopped the daily sacrifices. And so I pointed out in part 1, these were all types of what's going to come at the end time, and even more intense in the end time. And that's why it's important to notice this Hanukkah story, the parallels. And so there's the abomination of desolation, the image that is set up in the temple, a corrupt image, the daily sacrifices being stopped, and also, let's see, in 4 and 5. Oh, and then also in end time, notice how 4 prophets, including our Messiah is one of them, and also Daniel, he prophesies of an end time abomination of desolation. Also Paul, or we know his Hebrew name is Shaul, and I went into 2 Thessalonians 2, this man of sin, this man of lawlessness, Torahlessness, against Torah, will be in the end time. And then John, in Revelation, his Hebrew name Yochanan, he wrote the book of Revelation 20 years after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and talks about this same anti-Messiah that's going to be coming with great wonders and miracles and deceptions, and he'll be against the Torah as well, the instructions that come from our Creator, also through the holy oracles and his mitzvot and commandments. And also, point number 5, the Maccabees. Another parallel is how we see how they had to flee into the wilderness or into the mountains of Judea for a little over 3 years. And then our Messiah, says in Matthew chapter 24, and this is where I left off in part 1, it says here, "For there will be such great tribulation, such has not been since the beginning of the world to this time, and no, nor ever shall it be this bad again." And that's spoken of also by 3 other books and prophets, as we see in Ezekiel chapter 5 and verse 9. That prophecy is the same thing that we read about in Matthew here. It hasn't been fulfilled yet. And Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1. This time, the worst time in human history. The worst Holocaust still has not happened yet. And also in Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 10, the time of Jacob's trouble. And I talk about those in more detail if you go to my video teaching titled Ezekiel 33 Warning. And I go into those more detail. But it's interesting to notice that this time of abomination in Matthew is spoken of all the way back in verse 15. If I back up, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation set up," spoken by Daniel the prophet, "let him who reads, let him understand." And so I'm trying to expound upon this to help you understand, and if you understand, help others understand. Let's all, iron sharpening iron, we can sharpen each other and help each other understand that these end-time prophecies are going to happen, and it's similar fashion to what we see. And so this Feast of Hanukkah is a feast of dedication, and not just the physical temple, but it is to dedicate ourselves, as the Apostle Shaul says in, he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, in verse 19, we read, "For do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit," or Ruach HaKodesh, "who is in you, and whom you have from the Creator? And you are not your own. You are not your own. I am not my own." We are to give it up. Give it up to Him. "And for you were bought at a price." The Messiah paid that ransom through the crucifixion, becoming the Lamb, the Pesach Lamb. "And therefore glorify Him in your body and in your spirit, which are His." Our Creator's. We belong to Him. Our life, the reason we have life. He is the giver of life. We look to our Father as the Father of all. And so we are to dedicate ourselves. And look at the history of Hanukkah and how it's just a festival of thanksgiving this time of year and remembrance of what our Creator has done for His people through the Maccabees and what He's done in many other generations, as I've pointed out, and especially in these end times and how they parallel to the end times. So let's continue to realize that. And these Maccabees, as I mentioned, were in the wilderness for over 3 years, and we read about this in the book of Revelation, chapter 12. The end time faithful Hebrews, spiritual and physical Hebrews here. The woman, we understand in Revelation 12, is Israel. And so as it continues, and the dragon is Hasatan, the enemy, the serpent that was in the garden that deceived Adam and Eve in the first place. So we hear in verse 13 of chapter 12 in Revelation, it says, "Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman," the body of believers, "who gave birth to the male child." And And we know that is the Messiah, coming from the line of David. Verse 14, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for times and half a time. And this is taken from the book of Daniel, and we who Hebrews research this a little deeper, times and half a times is 3.5 years. So the Maccabees were in the wilderness for about 3 years, and here we see that the believers are going to have to flee, but it's not going to be a fighting of physical battles. As I pointed out in part 1, we are to love our enemies, but we are to flee persecution as we possibly can, and sometimes we have to be a light of persecution, but there's times when we're not to be a light, and there's a special promise of protection. And if you also go to my video teaching on hot, cold, and lukewarm, you'll see that some people will be protected, some people will be martyred during this time of tribulation. But the wings of an eagle, this is symbolic also, just as Israel. If you go back to Exodus, or Shemot in Hebrew, in Exodus chapter 19 and verse 4, it says that Israel was brought out of Egypt on the wings of an eagle. And we read about in Deuteronomy, or Devarim, chapter 32, verses 10 and 11, how Israel is the apple of his eye, and he protects them with his wings. His wings are a protection for his people. Miraculous protection. They had to walk out of Egypt on their own 2 feet. And also the Messiah says in Matthew 24, I forgot to read that, he says, those who are in Judea, flee into the mountains. When you see the armies surround Jerusalem at the end time, just before the abomination of desolations, or maybe just after it, but it's going to happen, and the faithful ones are going to flee like the Maccabees did for protection, and the Creator is going to fight their battles for them. We read about this. So the serpent spewed water like a flood after the woman, and the water, as you also read in my other teaching, is symbolic of armies are going to come after like a flood, as we read about in Jeremiah 46 verses 7 and 9, and also 47 verses 2 and 3, and we can even go to Isaiah 59 and verse 19 and see that the waters and floods are symbolic of armies coming after the woman. But the earth is going to help. Kind of like the parting of the Red Sea, the earth is going to part and it's going to swallow up these armies. And so the Israelites, the end-time Israelites and Hebrews are not going to have to fight. The Creator is going to fight for them. And then it says the serpent is upset. He's going to go make war after the rest of the offspring who are not being protected. And they will have a martyrdom to be a light to the world, which will help convert many more people. So wherever we are in this end time, we need to be faithful regardless. But now we have smooth times. We have times when we're not being persecuted. At least if you're living in a country like the United States where there's freedom of persecution and you have equal rights and so we have a lot of this protection and smooth times. In some countries it's not like that now, especially in the Middle East that are more Islamic. But as you have opportunity to be a light and be an example and walk with your Creator in any way that you can, as Paul, Shaul, says in Romans 12:1, let's give it up, our bodies, as a living sacrifice, not to be dead human sacrifices, but living sacrifices to live for Him, and not just to seek to save our own skins, because if we're just trying to do that, chances are we're going to lose it. But to give it up to Him, and He will do the saving. He will do the protection. He will do whatever He wants to do, and He is just. He is righteous, and whatever He decides our calling and ministry to be. But let's enjoy this time of Hanukkah every year in a Thanksgiving way. And notice how that story can propel and encourage us into the future parallels that are going to take place, that are very horrible in some ways and horrific in other ways. But we have great hope. We have a great kingdom that's coming. This kingdom will come to the earth. It talks about the Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem. And we can read about that all the way back in Isaiah chapter 2 in verses 1 through 4. And even the Apostle Shaul in Galatians chapter 4 verse 26 talks about this Jerusalem and where our citizenship should be. In Hebrews chapter 12 verses 22 through 23, we read about this kingdom, this Jerusalem that's going to be brought to this earth, right in the Middle East where the physical Jerusalem is. In Revelation chapter 21, we read about that as well, all through that chapter. Wonderful chapters. So there are things that must happen beforehand, though, that are not too pretty, and they're going to be difficult to go through. But as the Messiah, Yeshua, said in Luke chapter 21, verse 36, he says, "Watch therefore, and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape these things to come, and to stand before the Son of Man." So, how are you going to stand before Him? Are you taking a stand for the truth today? Make that stand with the bravery and courage of the Maccabees. Not that we have to fight and kill people physically, but that we can take a stand regardless of persecution, regardless of how the chips may fall, how the cards may play. We need to take a stand. Take a stand now while we have opportunity, to wake people up and help turn many people to righteousness, as we read about in Daniel chapter 12, that if we turn many people to righteousness, we will shine like the sun, like the brightness of the firmament forever and ever. A great promise, wonderful promises. So watch and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape these things to come and to stand before the Son of Man.